Welcome everyone who's joining this webinar. We will wait for a minute or so just to make sure that everyone is online, and then we will officially start the webinar. Thanks for joining. It seems like that the number of people has stabilized or would likely not change much. So welcome everyone to this GGP-connect Insight and Impact webinar. My name is Vytenis Juozas Deimantas, and I'm the Research Infrastructure Manager of the Generations and Gender Program. I'm also joined by Aisling Connolly, the Junior Researcher of the Generations and Gender Program. And both of us are really happy to welcome Professor Gerda Neyer from Stockholm University, who will be presenting the experience of generations and gender survey in Sweden, and dive into the topic of birth and intention in the pathway of childbearing in Sweden. A reminder that this new format of Generations and Gender Program Connect Insight and Impact webinars is aimed at encouraging our partners to talk more about the valuable insights that they developed and experienced in the process of GGS Round 2. And this is an excellent opportunity really to have a stronger and more informed GGP community globally, learn from each other's experiences, and inspire similar initiatives around the globe. Before giving the floor to Gerda, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping points. So this webinar is going to be recorded. If you prefer not to be recorded, please make sure that your camera and microphone are off. There's going to be time for Q&A. Please be advised to use the Q&A option on the screen or use the chat to pose your questions. And at the end of the presentation, we will be happy to give floor to Gerda to answer your questions, or also allow you to use your mic and camera to pose your questions live, which is also an option. And I know that Aisling has been inviting you to join this event as attendees, as panelists. So in case you don't want to be one, I think you can reject the invitation. So let's start without further ado. Let me give floor to Gerda, and it's all yours. Looking forward to the presentation.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for the invitation to present our research in Sweden. Just a little bit on me. I have been with the GGP since it started in the early 2000s, and I see its development with great joy, and also its expansion to an international and global GGP. It had been international before, but now it's going really global, and I am very happy also to show now a little bit of Sweden, what we had done and why we had done that. And please feel free to ask the questions, or also to email to us. And I will now share the screen with the PowerPoint presentation, then I hope it works. So, okay. So, is it now okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, because I cannot see you now, and I apologize for that. Yesterday it worked perfectly. Okay.
No problem.
So the presentation that I will do is not only birth, but also intentions, and whether there are new pathways to childbearing. And I will present some of the insights from the Swedish GGS 2012 and 2021. And I also acknowledge I acknowledge the GGS team, and that is Gunnar Andersson and Johan Dahlberg, and also all the other ones that have helped at the Stockholm University Demography Unit, and I will mention certain kind of people. And the surveys, both the 2012 and the 2021, was done in collaboration with Statistics Sweden. There is a working paper on the GGP. You can look it up on the Stockholm Research Report in Demography, and it will also appear in the Finnish yearbook of Population 2024. It should come out very soon for you to read on the details of the GGS 2021. Good, okay. Okay, so then the first thing is the decline of the total fertility rate in the Nordic countries. Since 2010, we see a concomitant decline over all the Nordic countries happening about at the same time, around 2010. But that's not only something that happened in the Nordic country, which is a conundrum or a puzzle in itself. But we see this, whoops, sorry, I go back. Sorry. But we see this as a global phenomenon, and I thank Ignacio, who updated the the Uruguayan data for me yesterday. But here we also added Uruguay, the United States and Japan to the Nordic countries. And you can see that around between 2010 and 2015, in all the countries, we see exactly the same decline that is going down. With the US, who had always been very different from Sweden, it's actually exactly the same. In parallel, they are moving. And in other countries, like in Uruguay, it dropped even further than it did in the Nordic countries. Then it's almost parallel to the Finns, who had one of their strongest fertility decline. So the question really is, what is going on? As regards Sweden, we have had these ups and downs and declines several times, but for all of the other declines, we have a reason, even if some of the reasons were then done retrospectively that we found out what it was. So the first decline was the pill and the second demographic transition. Then there were some policy reforms that led to some increases and slight declines afterwards. In 1990, there was a severe economic crisis in Sweden, and it was not only an economic crisis, but the welfare state support was also cut by about 25%, leading to that steep decline that was there in the the early 1990s. And then there was an increase again, partly in addition with the expansion of father's leave in Sweden. And since 2010, the fertility rate has been declining, and everyone thought that maybe during the COVID, it might change, but it didn't. So what is the reason behind this? It's a total conundrum, what we see. First of all, there are no obvious and common structural explanation that would fit for all the different countries that we look at. It's global and it's happening at the same time, and that has never been in such a similar way as we see it now. It happens across all welfare states, so be it liberal welfare state or countries that have very little support for families, conservative welfare states that support the gender-divided family, or even more universal welfare states like the Nordic countries. It happens in post-industrial countries as well as in countries that are more on a developing state to an industrial country. And it happens irrespective of the economic developments that are there. So for Sweden, the interesting point is that there was no welfare state retrenchment, so no cuts in benefits during that time, no backlash against gender equality. On the contrary, the father's leave was expanded and more than 90% of all fathers take parental leave, so that is not a decline either. There was no economic crisis, but the unemployment rate even declined and the levels of earnings increased. What we know from the registered data results is that the decline was not concentrated in a very specific socioeconomic group. I come to some specific later. So it was a homogeneous decline over all common indicators that we usually use in demography: age, sex, education, employment, income, migratory background, region, and even municipalities. But one thing was special, namely that the decline was concentrated on the first birth, and it was childless couples who did not get their first child. The interesting thing is that this is not specific to Sweden. The same has been found for Finland by Julia Hellström or for Iceland by Ari Jonsson and colleagues. So even more than anything else, we have to say, what is going on? What are the reasons? What is going on? And what is going on with that fertility decline was also one of the reasons why we joined the GGS 2021. Because with registered data alone, the puzzle can never be solved. There are suggestions that the change, as we could see, has no structural grounds, or at least not structural grounds that we have looked at so far, but that it's more a changes in the narratives and the perceptions of the futures through the individuals. So the questions posed by Vignoli, Comolli, but also by others in papers that we did afterwards, is it the perceived uncertainties of the future that cause it? Is it perception that the future will be economically more uncertain? Is it the global uncertainties of the future, given the war, the climate change, and other things that are happening right now? Or is it that there are new demands on parenting, especially given these growing uncertainties that were there? In order to answer those questions that were raised more theoretically at the beginning, we do need subjective insights. And the Generations and Gender Survey is, I think, the best survey at time to provide indicators in order to analyze those subjective insights. I will only mention three of them, but of course the attitudinal parts in the gender and generation surveys, the question on the gender equality, the question on well-being are essential to have a global picture of those subjective insights. I now concentrate only on those where we also have results and some things that are new in the Generations and Gender Survey, but I will not exclude all the other subjective factors that are collected in the GGS and that have never been collected in such complexity in any other survey that I know. So the first one is that the Gender and Generation Survey has questions on the intentions to have a or another child, depending on how many you have. So it is future oriented, like all the intentions are. Vignoli has written a paper on the necessity to look at intentions. The second is we in Sweden have the possibility to look at the changes in intentions. And of course, everyone who does the second or third wave of the GGS will have exactly the same possibility. In Sweden, we had the first GGS in 2012. That is very much at the beginning of the decline. And we have the second GGS now in 2021. So that was more or less the decline of almost 10 years. And then there are two new models that capture uncertainty that are included in the GGS 2021 and also in several of the other GGSs, and they will become a part of the second wave of the gender and generations, the next wave for everyone. So the first model is the economic uncertainty, and Daniele Vignoli has developed that. The second module was a new module, was one on global uncertainties, and that the Swedish team, together with the Nordic teams and the Italian collaboration, we kind of developed that together. And the third one is one on intensifying parenthood, and that was developed or added by Sunny Billingsley. I should say that the global uncertainty and the intensive parenthood models were all tested before in other surveys, but we implemented them into the GGS. So it's not completely new what we did and not our own fantasy, but it was something that had been tested before, which is an essential part to do that. Now I will concentrate on two things now in what I will present. The first one is on intentions, because all the other GGSs have that as well. And I would like to show some things that we found out with the Swedish GGS. There are two elements of the intentions. The first one is that there are short-term intentions, and the GGS always asks, do you intend to have a child in the next 3 years? The second one is those who say, no, I do not intend to have a child in the next 3 years, were asked, do you intend to have a child later or ever? So that both dimensions are there, the short term and the ever intentions for those who do not want to have one in the next 3 years. And it's always asked about, do you probably intend to have a child, definitely intend, probably not to have another child or definitely not have another child. These intentions are unique to the GGS. They were later on also adopted in the European Social Survey, for example, but that was quite unique at the GGS when it was founded from the onset. It is inspired by the theory of planned behavior, but also of similar theories by Miller and Pasta and others. It is a common feature to all the GGSs, so international comparison is possible. And it is an absolutely essential element to get any insight into the global fertility decline and in any kind of changes that are there, be it by gender, being by other kinds of indicators that are in the GGS. So, okay. Why is it so essential to look also at the changes in the fertility intentions and how we did it in 2012 and 2021? First of all, if there is a change in the short-term intentions, it can be a postponement, that people just do not want to have it in the next 3 years, but maybe in the next 5 years. But it can also signal that there is a retreat from having children in general, because we know that only up to 60% of definite intentions will be realized in the next 3 or 5 years. Those who are not definite, then the rate is even much lower, going down to 25% in some of the realization studies. If there is a decline in the intentions to ever have a child, remember those are those who say, no, I do not want to have one in the next 3 years. If they say, no, I do not want to have a child later on, it means a real retreat from having children for different reasons. I'm not going into the reasons now. And then there can also be something else, namely that probably intend to have a child could increase, which signals a growing uncertainty in the intentions to have a child. And that can be both. It can mean signaling a retreat, or it can signal a decline in the realization. We don't know one or the other, and that you cannot get from that question. I will show you now 2 results that we had from looking at the changes in intentions in Sweden. And I will concentrate first at something showing men and women, just to bring out one example, and the second one, the childless couples, because it is among the childless couples that fertility, that the decline actually happens. What do we see? What we see is that for men and for women, what happens is that definite declines to have a child in the next 3 years declines, and this is significant. And we also see that both for men and for women, the intentions, the uncertainty, so the probably not have a child in the next 3 years, so a kind of distancing in the probable, is also increasing for both. How is it if we go to ever having another child? Because that could be postponement, so we could also expect that there is a reversal in what we see here. But this is what we see on the intentions to ever have a child of those who do not want a child in the next 3 years. We see almost the same, even a stronger decline among, definite decline among men and women. We see an increase in probably not have a child. And I only tell you, please remark that definitely not have a child among women. I will come back to that later, but I'm not commenting on that. The most important findings here is that the definite intentions to have a child are declining for short-term and long-term intentions, and that the uncertainties, and especially probably not have another child, is increasing. How is it for couples, for childless couples? We only have childless individuals who live in a union, so we don't ask the couple, but each one of the individuals that I show, the results that I show now, is a person who is childless and lives with a partner. This is what we find in the short-term intentions, exactly the same as we find for men, for example, a decline in definite intentions, an increase in probably not have another child. There is even an increase in definitely not wanting to have a child. Remember, these are childless people. We also have an increase in probably have another child, but that's quite small compared to the decrease in indefinitely have a child, and the increase in definitely not having a child. What about the childless couple's intentions to ever have another child? And this is what we find there. A tremendous decline among indefinite intentions to become a parent ever among the childless couples, and an increase in probably not and definitely not having a child. That is also quite intense. It's up to 39 or 40%. The two are practically parallel over the time. So what do we find? The fertility decline and the change in intentions in 2012 to 2021 show that it is not only birth, but it's also intentions that decline. And I only showed you two of the results, but the decline of definitely intending to have a child is over all indicators that we have looked at: gender, age, education, employment status, the employment amount, part-time, full-time, the precariousness, temporary versus permanent employment, about the parities, 0-1, second child, partnership status, and regions in Sweden. So the definitely intending to have a child is declining everywhere. It cannot be a postponement, but there is a real decline because we have an increase in never wanting to have a child. There is also an increase in uncertainty, especially in probably not having a child, so that we see not only a decline in having one, but also becoming more uncertain towards rather not having another child. But I also showed you before that there is some declines in definitely not intending to have a child, so among the female, for example, and that looks at first as if this was a positive development. But what we find is not a positive development, but those in 2012 had a higher mean of children than the ones in 2021 did. So that it means that the same group in 2012 had already realized perhaps the wanted number of children, while in 2021 they had not done that, and still they now think either no, we probably won't have one, or they have decided not to have one at all. So these findings have gotten a lot of attention. So there was a huge public attention, there were TV, there were newspaper and TV news, there were debates, there was on the radio in Sweden and in other countries. There was a huge political interest as well. We had parliamentary and political delegations coming to Sweden or were invited to give presentations at parliamentary committees, UN committees, and other in parliamentary or in political circles. There is also a great scientific interest. The GGS in Sweden, for example, has been elevated to an infrastructure of national interest. That's quite an honor, even though it is not connected to money. But it means that the GGS is now of national interest because it is a survey to answer some questions. At the European level, we know that it's on the way to ERIC, and the GGS is going global. So more and more countries outside the European regions are actually implementing the GGS, providing a fantastic opportunity to look what is going on worldwide. So, but do we actually know from our research what are the common and the scientifically evidenced reasons for decline? And I don't think we do that yet. We know if we talk about narratives of the future, it is very broad. So then more research is needed on that. And I just showed the two new modules that we had in the Swedish GGS. This is the global uncertainty module. It might be, if you don't see the whole screen, a little bit too small for you, but you can see it in the SRD that, or in the Finnish Yearbook of Population, where we publish that as well. It's thinking about the future, how much does the following worry you? And then it's terrorism, climate change, overpopulation, economic crisis, military conflicts, weakened democracy. We have a whole list of global uncertainties which might be, which play their role in different kind of countries with different kind of strengths, of course. But we looked at it just in the global index, building an index over all those global uncertainties, what kind of impact it has on the fertility intentions. And I only show one picture for the short-term intentions, and this is what we find. The more worried people are about global uncertainties, the less likely they are to intend to have a child. We find exactly the same for ever wanting to have a child, perhaps with a more M or N like this. So the medium group is not less, has no fewer intentions than the ones who are low. Quite on the contrary, they might be a little bit, might be worried and a little bit more likely to intend to have a child. But definitely those who are very worried have the lowest intentions to have a child. But research has also shown that these kind of uncertainties can be counterbalanced by trust. So trust plays a resilience on the uncertainties. So we also asked about the next question: how much confidence do you have in the way the following institutions or groups do their job? And again, we asked more or less on national institutions, except for the EU. And what is the result of that? Yes, trust has a resilience effect. Those who trust in the institutions are more likely to say have higher intentions to have a child in the next 3 years. It's not quite the same when it comes to ever wanting to have another child. Then the differences are not as strong as we have it here. So there might be some kind of postponement. But what is the other new module that we put in? So we have that uncertainty plays a role and it has a depressing effect on fertility. Trust may counterbalance that uncertainty. What about intensifying parenthood? That concentrates on that parents have to invest more in the children. So it's not only their own, it's not only parents or individuals' own uncertainty about the future. This is also a module that goes about the future of the next generation, investing in children to keep up either the social status or to be successful in their future life. So it's not the parents' life, it's the life of the next generation. For Sweden, Sunny Billingsley and Stephanie Murborn find no real effect, but that could be because in Sweden you have these institutional care and you have for children from the early age on, and that in Sweden gender equality and social equality being the same, being everyone should have the same chances, no one should stick out, is a very social norm. It can be completely different in countries where social inequality is much, much larger than it is in Sweden. What kind of
Sorry to interrupt, Gerda. We're slowly running out of time. If you could
this is the last
move
one.
to the conclusion. Perfect.
This
Thank
is the
you.
last slide. Okay.
Great.
So what are the reasons? I think we do not know yet what are the real reasons for the fertility decline. We have a few indicators, but we do need much more research, and the Generations and Gender Survey with its comparative indicators over so many countries is just very good source to investigate this. First, we know that economic uncertainty plays a role, but there are national differences. So it might not be a global one. Second, we know that the global uncertainties play a role, but again, is it the same in all countries? Is there a general global uncertainties, or is it specific uncertainties that play a greater role in some countries, like climate change or terrorism in some countries? Is it intensifying parenthood, and in which countries? Is there a variation in the welfare state, the family support, or the gender structure that they have? Because intensifying parenthood means more pressure on mothers than on fathers because they do more care. And secondly, what is the role in trust in institutions, especially now in a global world where the national institutions in certain kind of areas have less possibility to influence national development than that was like 20 or 30 years ago? I think there is a lot to study, and the GGS is a very good source for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such an inspiring and, in a sense, also eye-opening presentation. I think not only I, but other people today will have quite a few questions, and I encourage everyone to, yes, to raise their hands or use the Q&A section to ask other questions. And I see that Mateusz has raised his hand, so perhaps let's move on with him.
Yeah. Oh, it's who?
Laurent also.
Oh,
Mateusz,
okay.
can you hear us? Would you?
Yes, now I can. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Okay. It was an excellent presentation and very inspiring, and forces us to ask oneself a lot of questions. I'm just wondering, the first slides showing the trends in fertility were mostly related to the highly developed countries, Japan, Europe, and so on. I was wondering, this is more like a hypothesis, whether what result would bring us if we included to the analysis the intensity of use of media. I mean, in some variations, perhaps intensity of use of social media or smartphones, for example, as we saw that the decline in 2010 is somehow related to the appearance of iPhone in 2007, 2008, and then like small, fast diffusion till 2010. I think we have some reasons to believe it may be relevant. For Finland, Professor Rotkirch showed that people who are using the smartphones more intensively, they feel more uncertain about the future. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. We also had a question on the use of social media in Sweden. For us, it didn't give any kind of things, but we did not look at the links between use of social media and the use of and uncertainty. So that we did not do. And of course, that would be a very, very important aspect, because that global could actually be that the connections over the social media are there. Now I forgot the title. There is a very nice book by Laurent Toulemont, can help me, by a French researcher, by Bergström is her name, and I just looked at it 2 days ago, and I apologize that I do not remember the title now. It's not Commodities of Emotions, but something similar. Laurent might remind me to it. And she looked using global data, using survey data, using interviews on how certain kind of changes in emotions happen, and that are stimulated by the media. Yeah, I completely agree with you. So your question is absolutely justified on that issue. I didn't include really developing countries, precisely because there might be a lot of different kind of things going on, and I wanted to have something where certain kind of factors are exactly the same.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I wouldn't compare Sweden to Uganda. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think there's also a question from Laurent.
Hmm?
Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Gerda, for this very nice presentation. So in fact, my question is that the fertility is declining in many countries, as you said, and there are many commonalities maybe. And I was also looking for some specificities, and I heard that in Sweden, there was a development of private schools with money given by the state to parents to choose their school for the children, and this resulted in huge problems and an overall decline in the trust in public, free and good quality education. And I was wondering whether that could be a reason of, let's say, not a decline in the overall trust, but a decline in the commitment of the state to take the burden of the education of children. So I was wondering whether you think that it could be one reason for this decline in fertility in Sweden, and even whether this decline in the quality of education related to privatization is a fantasy or something real. Thank you.
Okay. I can only, give my own opinion. I have no research on that. I think now one point is that one would expect that the intensifying, there is more investigation or more that couples would or individuals would invest more into the children to have intensifying parenthood, because if you have private schools, if you have more privatization, it also means that it requests more of parents. Yeah. It could be that there is a decline in trust. We know that there is a more segregating behavior with the schools, that especially migrant or children of migrant background then might accumulate or in one group. But I do not know how that actually affects the childbearing intentions. It could be, because intensifying parenthood leads to lower children, that we know another. You invest in one, I mean, Becker was the first one to say that, investigating into children in the 1960s. But there have been privatizations before. There was a privatization in the 1990s in childcare for a couple of years that then was done away again, because it showed that there was a segregation of that. There is a lot of privatization in old age care home. There is more pressure to investigate, to do more for yourself. But this has been going on and started long before the fertility decline happened. So what we actually do not know, if there are such social changes going on, or changes going on in welfare states or in labor markets, when do they affect the childbearing? That we do not know. Is it like with gender equality, it needs 2 decades before, or 4 decades or 5 decades before you see any changes? Or is it an immediate? When is it an immediate one? And when do we see a lagged effect of that? And this is not only a demographic, I'm a political scientist. This is also a question that political scientists have been tackling with and questioning for a long time. But thanks for the question, Laurent.
Thank you. I think there are a couple of comments in the chat, so I'll read them out. Francesca Fiori says, thanks for the fascinating talk. I do agree with the importance of these new explanations to understand the current decline. The question now follows, to what extent do you think these should be captured as individual level determinants, or rather should we pay attention to shared feelings within the social context surrounding individuals, which can potentially amplify feelings of uncertainty and trust? Not sure this can be done with GGS, but then Francesca asks, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I can only say, I also believe that the individual level might not be enough. Because I again refer to, in that case, Eva Illouz and to other research on changes of emotions. I mean, this is not a new research topic that has been around in the 1930s, and now it comes back again. That if there are social changes and economic changes and changes going on, it also changes the relationship between people. And I always used to tell the students, read the chapter in The Process of Civilization by Norbert Elias, and there is a chapter on how state formation and social changes affected the behavior in the bedroom, as he writes. So it has an effect on the social relationships. It has an effect on the sexual relationships, and that, of course, has an effect on childbearing. And again, I apologize that I forgot the title of the book by Bergström. Yeah? It's in English, in French, and in Swedish. So, and she tackles that question to say that the social media, especially TikTok and the dating apps, have changed the social relationship and the sexual relationships between couples. And of course, that must in one or other form have an impact on childbearing. And this cannot be done by a survey. I think for that, we also need qualitative interviews to dig into how do people themselves reason what is changing. In the Swedish GGS, we do have also a connected qualitative study, but it would, of course, be nice to have a panel qualitative study. Don't ask of the costs of such things.
Thank you. We will not. I think we'd end up scared. And Francesca says thank you. Now, the very last question in the chat is about the book, and then that's Marie-Caroline who asked it. And is the book that you mentioned is by Eva Ilusa, Emotions and Commodities? Emotions as Commodities, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, so that I understand
Sorry.
answers.
Sorry, my brain. Okay.
That's
Yes.
perfect then. Thank you, Gerda. Thank you very much for your time and this fascinating sharing of the experience that you had and the work that you've done in Sweden. I also thank everyone for joining us today for this GGP webinar, and invite everyone to join the upcoming ones in the future. But now I'd like to formally close this webinar and stop the recording.